How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Great. Thanks for
Good.
joining me.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we're going to chat about why you should lengthen your pelvic floor
Yes.
and help break down some myths around leaking always being a problem with strength and needing to do more Kegels, and that's going to fix your problem, or that if you just like pee before you do your start your workout, you're not going to leak too.
Yes.
So why don't you just tell everyone who you are real quick, and then we'll dive in.
All right, guys. Hi, I'm Danielle. I own Burn Boot Camp Worthington. We're over on Wilson Bridge Road. I met Missy when I started seeing her. It's been at least 5 years
At least.
back, and I've just followed her wherever she goes. 10 out of 10 recommend seeing either her or Amanda or Bridget if you haven't already.
Yeah. So obviously, if you've never been to Burn Boot Camp, there's a decent amount of jumping that happens, I would say.
Yes. Yep.
But not to say that that doesn't happen in a lot of environments, and that it doesn't just happen with jumping. It also, a lot of women also leak with heavy lifting. So it
Yep.
could be like squats, deadlifts, any other movement, not just like the impact movement. So I want to make sure people understand that when we're talking about leakage, it's not, well, there's two types of leakage. First of all, there's like the stress incontinence, which is what we're mostly talking about, which is where you pee when you jump, laugh, sneeze, cough. So it's the stress of your body causing the leak, versus urge incontinence, which is where you just get like that super strong urge to go to the bathroom and can't hold it, and then you leak there as well.
And then there's also the misconception that you have to have had children and that it would be odd otherwise to have leakage, and that's absolutely untrue.
Very untrue. Yes. So teenagers can leak, even children can leak. It is a pelvic floor dysfunction. It is not just a dysfunction from birth. So anybody could have this issue. And then what we really want to talk about is when we go into the part that it's not just a strength issue, and that it's a lot of it is like a coordination issue, and you might be able to speak to that a little bit, or an endurance issue.
Yes.
So strength versus endurance versus coordination can
Yep.
all play into when you leak.
Yes. My first experience with this was when I joined Burn back 7 years ago almost now. I could definitely count on my one hand how many times I had jumped rope since childhood. And that was something that we do here at Burn. We do double unders. That's a big goal of a lot of people. And that was the first time that I experienced leakage. But that being said, I had other symptoms of pelvic floor dysfunction for a really long time, actually since high school. I just hadn't experienced the leakage. Low back pain was a huge thing, and that's actually the thing that got me to Missy in the first place. My chiropractor actually recommended that I go see a pelvic floor physical therapist for the low back pain that we were just continually and repeatedly over the course of like 18 months unable to treat.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of what we do is connecting that too, is like low back pain, hip pain, SI joint pain, like it's all related. So when we go into things that can contribute to the pelvic floor tension, one of those things is hip stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about the parts of the body that contribute to it, we can break it down into like three parts. So the thoracic spine and your rib cage.
Mm-hmm.
The mobility through your thorax plays a huge part in how well your pelvic floor is able to give. So if we kind of think of it as like a piston system, the pelvic floor and the diaphragm need to work in unison. So when we are holding a ton of tension in our thoracic spine, we can create a lot of tension in our pelvic floor. And then when we go to pound on it, sometimes I explain it, it's not a great analogy, but I explain it as like the bladder and the pelvic floor are almost like pounding against each other.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can let go of the pelvic floor, then the bladder can kind of just like rebound and be a trampoline with the pelvic
Which
floor.
feels very counterintuitive when you're experiencing leakage.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What is one cue that has helped you in terms of that part of your body, like the thoracic spine area?
I think for me, the biggest cue, regardless of where we're talking about, is to try to put tension elsewhere.
Yeah.
So rather than tensing up in any particular area with any exercise specifically, it's wherever it is that I'm feeling like I'm just more hyper aware, I think actually really is what it is. But when I'm experiencing any sort of tension in any area, then my immediate goal is to relax that area and push this elsewhere where it's not going to impact whatever the exercise is or whatever symptoms I might be experiencing, if any.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're not going to give it all away because we're going to go, when we do our workshop in a couple
Yes.
weeks, we're going to go into more specific ways to make sure you're thinking of the cues that are going to help you control your leakage, and then also giving you some tests to determine like where you have restrictions that you maybe haven't been thinking about. So we'll go more into that. But like she said, relaxing your mid back is like hugely impactful. And you might not think of it as something you even do, but once we start looking at some of your mechanics, you're like, oh yeah, I'm actually just like holding my breath, which, you know, the tension in the thoracic spine goes hand in hand with your breath. So let's talk about the breath. So the next part is like breathing. So we're going to go into this in detail in the workshop about how you should breathe when you're doing fitness in general, not just jumping, even lifting. We'll go into a little bit of breath mechanics with lifting. But 9 times out of 10, when I watch or have someone in the clinic do a movement, and I tell them to explain it to me what they're doing, and then I'm usually asked the question of like, what's your breath doing?
The answer is I don't know. Uh-huh.
Yes, that's it. Like the awareness. So it's like you might not be doing it wrong. You just have no idea what you're doing.
Yep.
You know, there's no awareness to your breath. And as soon as we can flip that and just start thinking about your breath in a different way, and there's not like a right or wrong way to breathe, like you have to exhale on landing or you have to inhale on this part of the move. There's common trends that a lot of people do well with exhaling on a certain part of the movement,
Right.
but not one size fits all. And it's more of the awareness, you know?
Yes.
So, what's one cue in that area that's helped you with your breath?
Um, for me, it's blowing out, and I'll speak to jumping rope just since I mentioned that earlier. Blowing out when I am in the air so that when I'm landing, I have exhaled all of my breath and then I'm inhaling as I'm coming back up. That's been a huge game changer for me.
Yeah.
And I will definitely just piggyback off of what Missy had just said. Um, I remember my first couple of appointments, and my first couple of appointments were literally just talking about breathing. And I have told people for many, many years that once I went to that appointment, very first appointment, it was like magic. I didn't have any leakage anymore. It wasn't an issue. So just for reference.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to the fact that like is a great example of how this isn't just a strength problem, because we cannot in one session change your strength. You know, we know strength gains takes 4, 6, 8 weeks to make changes. If your pelvic floor is actually weak, it would take that much time to notice a difference in your leakage. But if it's a coordination, a breath issue, then you'll notice immediate changes, which is the most amazing part, that we can
Right.
change your leakage within one session,
Yeah.
with some simple
So
cueing.
make sure you get signed up and registered today.
Yeah. Okay, the next one is hip mobility. So the other, obviously, this is a more, I guess, direct link. If I don't have my model with me, but if you can imagine, the hips are right there with the pelvic floor. So hip mobility and the way your femur moves on your pelvis is a huge impact on the tension you carry in your pelvic floor, because the pelvic floor muscles and then the glute muscles kind of all layer on top of each other. So when we go into the workshop, we're going to be doing some tests for hip mobility, looking at everyone's hip mobility and giving you our favorite hip mobility exercises, and then coordinating those hip mobility exercises to lengthening and releasing your pelvic floor. So any thoughts there, or can you speak to any hip things?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to some hip things. I'm working on that right now, actually. I think that over the course of your general fitness journey, you have different things that pop up and different, I don't know, issues for lack of better words. And right now, my biggest issue and source of tension is my left hip. And I noticed that in lots of different areas. So whether it be a squat or double unders, honestly, we've been looking at that a lot too lately in my appointments. I definitely would say the more I have focused on my hip mobility with my left side in particular, the less, I guess, symptoms I've been experiencing across the board. So I could definitely say that that is 100% easily connected.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite hip mobility exercise?
The one that I've actually really liked doing that you and I had talked about is so you do 90-90 sometimes where you're sitting on the floor and
Yeah.
legs are bent and you pop them side to side. Instead of doing that, I've been doing bare, like without my shoes on because it's just a little bit easier, feet wide and knees together. That is one that has been a favorite of mine.
Like in all
No,
fours?
no,
Oh,
seated. So
seated. Yeah.
yeah, slightly lean back, trying to sit up as much as I can, but knees together and
Yeah.
feet out
Yeah.
wide.
So like almost like a seated windshield wiper, like
Yes,
box shit.
yes,
Yeah.
yep.
Because like she said, so when she's describing knees in feet wide, she's describing internal rotation of the hip. Most of us women have more external rotation. So that's kind of like your feet out and you're sitting crisscross applesauce or Indian style is your external rotation. A lot of us have more mobility there. And then when we go to the opposite, the internal rotation, we are a lot more limited. Those should be a little more, they don't have to be equal, like 45 degrees here, 45 degrees here, but they should be more similar. So if we see 45 degrees in one direction and like 5 or 10 degrees in the other direction, that's a big discrepancy that we want to look at. And that's probably playing into your pelvic floor tension. So cool. We're going to get more into that in the workshop. And then the last one is your feet. So a lot of people don't think about your feet when we're talking about pelvic floor, but there's a huge direct link to your feet when we're talking about pelvic floor tension and being able to like recruit your pelvic floor muscles as well. So we're going to do a little bit with footwork in the workshop too, and just seeing like having everyone test their balance and kind of seeing what points you even think about when you're standing there on your feet. And a lot of people, this is another one with the breath where it's like, what's your foot doing? And they're like, I have no idea. So landing mechanics is one, but then also just foot mechanics in general, where they are in space and like where your pressure through each foot is when you're doing squats, deadlifts,
Or
lunges,
even
things
just
like that.
standing.
Yeah.
That one too. That one always is very surprising to me. We just had an appointment recently where I was just standing and we were trying to assess where exactly the pressure is on your feet. And it's a really hard thing to pay attention.
Yeah. You're just like, you have to unlearn all these like patterns
Yes.
that you've developed over potentially a decade or more. And one thing that a lot of us women do is we change our posture into kind of like a what we call like a sway back posture and tilt our pelvis forward, and then we're like hanging on our heels a lot, and so the pressure's oftentimes in our heels or oftentimes in like the outside of our feet. So it's like, can we find your big toe again? You know, can we find like that pressure through the ball of your big foot or big toe? So that one is an awesome cue too, and we'll dive more into that. And then we'll kind of write all these our favorite cues out too, so that everyone that comes to the workshop is going to have like a physical takeaway handout to have with them, or we can email it to all the participants either way. So yeah, last thing I want to talk about is going more into like the endurance piece. So when we start teaching women how to relax their pelvic floor and control their leakage, then we have to talk about endurance. So like sets, reps, all those kinds of things. So maybe you can speak to that too. Whereas how many years ago could you only do sets of
Yeah.
5
Right.
or 10 or or even 25 double unders, and that's fine. And if you don't have a goal for more than that, then like you can live in, like
Yes.
I kind of live in the 25 to 30 rep range, and I'm cool with that. I don't necessarily have a goal to be able to do more at one time, but if I were to have that goal, I'd have to practice, right? I'd have to do
Yep.
something. So what have you learned about the endurance?
What I have learned is I'm even learning it still now. Like it's almost like a relearning, if you will. Because I feel like you get to a point where you just kind of get complacent with almost
Yeah,
anything. It doesn't really seem to matter what it is. But for me, it was learning that when I get to that threshold where the pelvic floor is fatigued, not to keep going, and training yourself to do that is incredibly hard, particularly if you've been an athlete and you've been like super competitive in, your past life, or maybe you still are in your workouts.
yeah.
Or maybe you're working out next to your husband and you're like, no, I'm just going to beat them. Um,
I will be
so for me,
better.
yeah, for me, it has been that. It has been like, okay, no, I'm going to stop now. I'm going to reset, just like I would for a strength move. And you got to stop, reset, take those breaths, take that breather, and then go right back into it. And then maybe you do up until, one less, or even right at that same number, and then stop again. And then you keep kind of working toward getting beyond that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about like threshold, like what is your leakage threshold
Mm-hmm.
and how can we like push into that threshold but not go beyond it? And then where do we start stacking so that we can then go past the threshold
Right.
once you've built some of your endurance? Little sneak peek, I'm working on a leakage course, and that is in there. So
Love it.
that'll be coming out hopefully at the end of March.
Awesome.
How to leak free in the gym. Yeah. Any other thoughts around this before we wrap up? And
I think that my biggest thought is that people oftentimes underestimate how much this impacts their lives and how much better their lives can get just from attending something like this. Like I said, the first appointment that I had was like pure magic. So just envision that for the small registration fee for this, what sort of magic can happen for you as well, and
yeah,
how much better your life can be and less frustrating, because there is nothing more frustrating than to be like, oh, it's a conditioning day at the gym and now I have to go change my pants because I wanted to wear these blue pants, but I'm going to leak, so I don't want to wear the blue pants anymore.
yeah. We can try to convince ourselves that those things don't matter,
Yes.
um, and that this is just how it's going to be now, and make it normal, or always wear a pad, or always wear the black pants.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that stuff's playing in your head, you're frustrated, you're like, why can't I do this? And like you said, you can't wear the pants you want to wear, and it seems like such a silly little thing, like, well, who cares, just wear black pants all the time. Like, no, I don't want to.
Yes.
Actually, nobody really looks good in black unless, have you done your color analysis? Because
Black's not
black's
it.
not it for me. I'm brown. But anyways, it is so impactful, and you don't need to wear pads all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be a whole nother conversation, but that's not even like sanitary and healthy for you long term. So if you're just in this habit of needing a panty liner all the time because you leak a little bit, but then you convince yourself that like it's just a panty liner, so it's not that big of a deal. Well, that's sitting against your vulva like all day, and that's just, in my opinion, that's
Yeah.
just chemicals sitting against like your most precious connective tissue and
Mm-hmm.
soft tissue, and like we don't want that for anybody, like we want to keep this area healthy. This is like a very important part of your body for not just like sexual function and bowel and bladder function, but as you age, like it's just so important to have knowledge and awareness to this space that culture has kind of just shut down as like not important.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, to speak to Danielle's point, like we're trying to just do a series of these workshops throughout this year to gain community awareness, and we want these workshops to be really accessible to the community. That's why the registration fee is $10. We're not trying to make this crazy, and there's going to be some really good raffle prizes just
Yeah.
to mention as well.
Yes, super good raffle prizes from both of us, and then also Lululemon is throwing some things in there too, and they are pretty awesome
Yeah.
what they are passing out. One other thing I wanted to note is if you're watching this or if you come across the posts and you're like, I don't even know what my pelvic floor is, so I don't need to go. You actually do. You're the person who does need to go. So if you're hearing
Or
me,
maybe you don't even leak yet,
yes.
but
Hmm.
you want to be proactive,
Right,
then amazing too. Like you don't have to even have this issue yet,
right.
but I promise you, somewhere down the line, it will probably be an issue for you at some point. So might as well be proactive in your healthcare now and get the knowledge.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, thanks for joining me. And the workshop is March 1st. So the registration's live. If you can't find it or have questions, reach out to either Danielle or I through our platforms
Yep.
and we will get you squared away.
Yep. Hope to see you there. Thanks, Missy.
Yep. Thanks. See ya.
Bye.